breakfast.
I had been a wife for 3 hours and 17 minutes when I found my husband with another woman. The Oriental Hotel roared below us, crystal and champagne and Burna Boy grinding through the speakers, while the service corridor held a quieter truth. At the end of that dim red-lit hallway, outside our presidential suite, Chinita pinned a woman in a blood-colored dress to the wall and kissed her like he'd waited his whole life to betray me. My gown whispered against marble as I stood there, weightless and heavy at once, watching the ceremony of my undoing begin without vows or witnesses. The ballroom had promised forever. Chandeliers like frozen rain, 300 guests in Lagos finery, roses and gold ribbon, and aunties spraying naira with happy hands. But forever is a costume. It gleams until the light moves. He'd said urgent business call and slipped away after our first dance. Now I saw what urgent meant. Her laugh, sharp, victorious, scratched the corridor's silence. His agbada, once immaculate, was creased with hunger. I felt the cake knife countdown from 10 minutes in the DJ's voice and understood I was already a widow. Only no one had told the bride. Grief did not explode. It crystallized. The world arranged itself into clean lines, the angle of his shoulders, the glint of her nail dragging his back, the small, obscene intimacy of a bow tie loosened for the wrong mouth. I did not scream. I measured. The bridal smile I had been practicing since morning set like plaster on my face as the music thumped through the wall. I cataloged the scene, placed it neatly beside the date, the time, the scent, the sound, the feeling. This is how pharmacists work. Identify, label, store. Even poison earns a shelf. Lagos knows her. Ngozi Okafor, real estate royalty, charity galas like battlefields, a Lamborghini that parts traffic like the Red Sea. People say she builds empires. People rarely ask who owns the ground beneath them. She believed tonight was a quiet conquest. Take the groom, take the headline, take the room. But headlines are surface water. Under the city, deeper currents move, leases, holdings, trusts, signatures you never see. While she pressed her mouth to my husband's, her company's lights burned 12 floors above Victoria Island in an office she rents from a landlord she has never met. Me. Chinita thought he chose wealth when he chose her. He chose spectacle. Real wealth prefers the dark. Numbers that travel silently across continents, assets that sleep in other names, returns that do not need applause. For 2 years, I let him love the version of me he could understand. The careful pharmacist in a modest car, the woman who saved, the woman who planned, the woman whose life fit inside a monthly budget. Love is a mirror. He kept polishing his side, never once asking what glass might hold my reflection. He wanted reassurance. He married a secret. I stepped back from the corridor first. Not because I was weak, but because I was finished with witnesses. Chinidu, my new husband, the man who had just traded our future for a Range Rover and a night of cheap passion, had just betrayed a woman whose net worth, hidden and meticulously managed, stood at $500 million. The champagne tower glittered under crystal chandeliers like liquid gold caught in a dream I was about to watch collapse. Oriental Hotel's grand ballroom pulsed with Afrobeats, Burna Boy's Last, ironically shaking the walls, while 300 guests celebrated what they believed was the beginning of my happily ever after. My wedding gown, custom-made with 10,000 hand-sewn beads that caught the light with every breath, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I stood near the chocolate fountain, my smile painted on, searching the sea of dancing bodies for Chinidu, my husband of exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. He disappeared 20 minutes ago, right after our first dance, claiming he needed to handle an urgent business call. But there are no business calls at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. Not unless the business is betrayal. My cousin Obiageli grabbed my arm, her acrylic nails digging into my skin through the lace sleeves. Ada, that woman in red is leaving, she hissed, her voice barely audible over the DJ's transition to Wizkid. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The woman in red. She'd been hovering at the edge of the reception all evening like a vulture circling dying prey, wearing a dress so crimson it looked like she'd bathed in wine or blood. Her smile never reached her eyes when she'd congratulated us in the receiving line, her handshake cold and calculating, her gaze sliding over me like I was invisible. I felt her watching us during the ceremony, felt the weight of something dark and hungry in her stare. Now she was gliding toward the side exit, her expensive perfume trailing behind her like a warning I'd ignored. And right behind her, straightening his agbada with guilty hands, was my husband. Time slowed to a cruel crawl as I watched Chinito follow her through the service door that led to the hotel's private corridor. He didn't look back, didn't hesitate, didn't even bother to be discreet. My aunties were doing the traditional money spray on the dance floor, Naira notes floating through the air like confetti at a funeral, while my mother-in-law posed for photos with her society friends, showing off her new daughter-in-law like a prize she'd won. My father, who'd walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, was laughing with Chinita's father over pepper soup and palm wine, celebrating the union of two families. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone was blind. And I stood there in my 10,000 bead gown, watching my husband walk out of our wedding reception to be with another woman, feeling my heart crack down the middle like glass dropped on marble. Adaeze's grip tightened on my arm. "Ada, please tell me I'm seeing things," she whispered, her voice shaking. But I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The ballroom spun around me, the gold decorations, the white roses, the smiling faces, all of it blurring into a nauseating kaleidoscope of lies. My wedding planner rushed past, checking her clipboard, ensuring every detail of this perfect day was executed flawlessly. Perfect. The word tasted like poison on my tongue. I'd planned this day for 8 months, agonizing over every detail, wanting everything to be flawless because I genuinely believed I was marrying my best friend. I'd chosen the Oriental Hotel because Chinito proposed to me in their rooftop restaurant. I'd selected this date because it was exactly 3 years since our first date. I'd sewn my own something blue into the hem of my dress, a piece of fabric from the shirt he wore the night he first told me he loved me. Every single detail had been a love letter, and he couldn't even wait until midnight to desecrate it. "I need to go," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and hollow, like it was coming from underwater. Adaeze's eyes widened in panic. "Go where?" "Ada, you can't leave your own reception." But my feet were already moving, carrying me toward that side exit like a woman possessed. My heels clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown. Guests reached out to hug me as I passed, complimenting my dress, my makeup, my joy. If only they knew. If only they could see that their radiant bride was walking toward the edge of a cliff she'd been standing on all along. The DJ announced our cake-cutting ceremony was in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I wondered if that would be enough time for my husband to finish betraying me, or if he'd already finished and was on his way back, ready to cut cake and take photos and continue this elaborate performance of devotion. My hand touched the cold metal of the exit door handle, and for one suspended moment, I hesitated. Some part of me, the hopeful part, the part that still believed in fairy tales, screamed at me to turn around, to go back to the party, to choose ignorance over devastation. Because once I walked through that door, once I saw whatever was waiting on the other side, there would be no unknowing it, no unseeing it. My life would split into before and after, and the woman I was right now, standing in her wedding gown with the last shreds of her innocence, would cease to exist. The music thumped behind me, something about love and loyalty and forever, while guests laughed and danced and celebrated a marriage that was dying before it even began. I thought about my vows, spoken just hours ago. In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. How naive I'd been. How utterly, heartbreakingly naive. I pushed open the door and stepped into the corridor, my wedding gown whispering against the floor like a ghost's warning. The hallway was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs that cast everything in a sickly red glow. And there, at the end of the corridor, outside the door to the presidential suite we'd reserved for family photos, I saw them. Chinito had her pressed against the wall, his hands in her hair, his mouth on hers, his body, my husband's body, the body I'd saved myself for, waited for, dreamed about, moving against hers with a hunger that made my stomach revolt. She laughed, actually laughed, as she pulled him closer, her blood-red nails scraping down his back, marking him like property. The woman in red, his mistress. On our wedding day. 3 hours after our vows. 3 hours after he'd looked into my eyes and promised me forever. And somewhere in the distance, I could still hear the music, still hear the guests celebrating, still hear the DJ calling out, "Where's our beautiful bride? Time to cut the cake." But the beautiful bride was dead. And the woman standing in this hallway, watching her marriage disintegrate before it even began, was someone new. Someone cold. Someone who was about to learn exactly what she was capable of when the person she loved most in the world proved to be a stranger, wearing a familiar face. Her name was Ngozi Okafor, and in Lagos society, that name carried weight like an inheritance. I'd heard whispers about her long before I'd ever seen her face, the self-made CEO who'd built her luxury real estate empire from nothing, the woman who wore Bottega Veneta like armor and drove a white Lamborghini Urus through Victoria Island traffic like she owned the roads. She did, actually, own the roads. Her company had developed half the luxury properties in Ikoyi, and her client list read like a Forbes billionaire directory. At 35, she'd achieved what most Nigerian businesswomen spent lifetimes chasing. Power. Influence. The kind of wealth that made politicians return her calls within minutes. And she collected men the way some women collected designer handbags, beautiful accessories to be shown off, used, and discarded when something newer caught her eye. Chinito was her latest acquisition. I just hadn't known it until I saw them together, their bodies intertwined in that hallway, her laugh echoing off walls that should have been sacred. I'd retreated from that corridor like a woman fleeing a crime scene, my mind struggling to process what my eyes had just witnessed. Back in the reception hall, I moved through the crowd like a ghost, smiling and nodding while my soul was hemorrhaged. My mother noticed something was wrong. Mothers always do, but I shook my head when she approached, mouthing, "I'm fine," through lips that felt like they belonged to someone else. The cake cutting happened. Chinito materialized from wherever he'd been, from her, from his mistress, from his betrayal, and stood beside me with his arm around my waist, grinning for the cameras. His lips, the same lips that had just been devouring another woman, smiled as we fed each other vanilla cake with buttercream roses. The photographer captured what must have looked like a perfect moment, the handsome groom in his pristine agbada, the beautiful bride in her beaded gown, both of them glowing with newlywed joy. No one could see that I was dying inside. No one could smell her perfume still clinging to his clothes. No one knew. Later that night, when I finally escaped to the bathroom, the only place a bride could cry in peace, I Googled her. Ngozi Okafor. Her Instagram was a shrine to excess. Private jets, champagne brunches at the Four Seasons, charity galas where she posed with governors and oil tycoons. Her company's website listed properties worth billions of naira. And there, in her tagged photos from 6 months ago, I found them. Chinito and Ngozi at a tech conference in Abuja. Chinito and Ngozi at a networking event in Lekki. Chinito and Ngozi at a restaurant opening, his hand on her lower back, her head thrown back in laughter. All of it hidden in plain sight, public, but invisible to me, because I'd trusted him. Because I'd been too busy working 12-hour shifts at the pharmacy, too busy planning our wedding, too busy being the supportive girlfriend-turned-fiancé-turned-wife to notice that my man was being groomed by a woman who saw relationships as corporate acquisitions. The dates on those photos told a story I'd been too blind to read. Their friendship had started 8 months ago, right around the time Chinito's tech startups began struggling financially. His company, TechBridge Solutions, had been his dream, a platform connecting small businesses with affordable tech support. Noble idea, terrible execution, worse timing. He'd maxed out his credit cards, borrowed from friends, even taken a loan from his uncle. Nothing worked. The platform was bleeding money, clients were scarce, and Chinito was drowning in debt and wounded pride. Then, Like a designer-clad angel, Ngozi Okafor appeared. She discovered his company at a networking event, claimed she saw potential, and offered to be his mentor and investor. Within weeks, TechBridge had a new office in a building she owned, rent-free. Chinita suddenly drove a Range Rover Sport, a gift he'd claimed from a satisfied client. His entire wardrobe was upgraded to designer labels. He started attending exclusive business dinners 3 nights a week, always with the same explanation. "Baby, I'm building connections. This is how business works in Lagos. Ngozi is introducing me to people who can change our lives." Our lives. He'd said our lives while selling his soul, and mine, to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a handsome toy to play with until she got bored. Sitting on that cold bathroom floor in my wedding gown, mascara-stained tears dripping onto imported Italian tiles, I finally understood the full scope of the transaction. Ngozi hadn't just bought his company's survival. She'd bought him. Every dinner invitation, every business opportunity, every gift disguised as mentorship had been a carefully orchestrated seduction. She'd studied him, identified his weaknesses, his struggling business, his desperate need to prove himself, his fragile ego that craved validation, and she'd exploited every single one. Chinita, for all his talk about integrity and building something meaningful, had been shockingly easy to purchase. All it took was money, connections, and the promise of becoming someone important in Lagos society. He'd sold us out for a Range Rover and a seat at tables he'd never been invited to before. And the price? His dignity. Our marriage.
Me.
But here's what neither of them knew, what nobody in that ballroom full of celebration knew. I wasn't some naive pharmacist from a modest Enugu family who'd gotten lucky enough to marry up. That was the story Chinita believed because that was the story I'd let him believe. The truth was so much bigger, so much more devastating to the narrative he'd constructed in his greedy little mind. And Ngozi, for all her intelligence and business acumen, had made a fatal error in her calculations. She'd looked at me, the quiet wife in the modest Toyota, the supportive girlfriend who never demanded anything, the humble small-town girl who seemed grateful just to be chosen, and she'd seen nothing. No threat, no competition. Just an obstacle to be stepped over, a placeholder to be replaced. She'd looked at me and seen exactly what I'd wanted everyone to see. Someone who could be discarded without consequence. Someone powerless. Someone weak. How wrong she was. How spectacularly, devastatingly wrong they both were. I sat there on that bathroom floor, surrounded by designer tiles and marble countertops, in a hotel where a presidential suite cost more per night than most Nigerians earned in a month, and I made a decision. I would let them think they'd won. I would let Chinita believe his betrayal had gone unnoticed, let Ngozi believe she'd successfully claimed her prize. I would smile and play the heartbroken but forgiving wife, the woman too in love to walk away, too weak to fight back. I would let them underestimate me completely. Because the thing about being underestimated, the thing about people believing you're powerless, is that they never see you coming. They never protect themselves. They never imagine that the quiet woman they've dismissed might be the one holding all the cards. And when the moment came, and it would come, when their house of cards collapsed and their carefully constructed lies imploded, they would finally understand who they'd really been dealing with. But by then, it would be far, far too late. The secret lived in offshore accounts and investment portfolios scattered across 3 continents, in board meeting minutes where my real name appeared, in quarterly reports that showed profits growing like wildfire. $500 million. Not Naira dollars. The number was so large it didn't feel real, sometimes. Even to me. Adaeze Holdings. My company. My empire. Built in shadows and silence, piece by piece. Investment by investment, over 7 years that had transformed me from a pharmacy student with wild dreams into one of the wealthiest women in West Africa. And Chinita, my husband, my betrayer, the man who'd just sold our marriage for a Range Rover and a rich mistress, had no idea.
None.
He'd married me believing I was exactly what I appeared to be, a humble pharmacist earning maybe 4 million naira a year, driving a 2015 Toyota Corolla, living in a modest flat in Surulere, shopping at ShopRite instead of Spar, buying clothes from Jumia instead of designer boutiques. He'd looked at me and seen someone small, someone manageable, someone who would be grateful for whatever crumbs of attention and affection he tossed her way. Poor, foolish Chinedu. He'd married a gold mine while lusting after fool's gold. The story began 7 years ago, when I was 21 and still in pharmacy school at the University of Lagos. Chief Adaeze Okonkwo, not related to me, despite sharing my married name, was a family friend, a self-made pharmaceutical magnate who'd built his fortune importing and distributing essential medicines across West Africa. He had no children, no wife after his spouse passed away, just his business and his legacy. He'd watched me grow up, saw something in me that others missed. Maybe he recognized the hunger in my eyes, the way I devoured business journals instead of fashion magazines, the way I asked questions about profit margins and supply chains instead of parties and boyfriends. One afternoon, he called me to his office, a sprawling penthouse in Victoria Island that overlooked the lagoon, and made me an offer that would change my life. "Adaeze," he said, his voice rough with age and wisdom, "I will give you 2 million naira. Invest it however you want. If you make profit, keep it. If you lose it, I'll give you 2 million more. But I need to know, do you have the mind for this game? Or are you just another dreamer?" I'd invested that 2 million in a struggling pharmaceutical startup in Ghana that was developing malaria treatment protocols for rural areas. Everyone said it was risky, that startups fail, that I should play it safe with government bonds or real estate. But I'd done my research, seen the gap in the market, recognized the potential for massive scalability if they could just secure the right partnerships and funding. 6 months later, that company signed a distribution deal with the World Health Organization. My 2 million became 12 million. Chief Okonkwo's wrinkled face had split into a grin when I showed him the returns. "You have the mind," he'd said, nodding slowly. "Now let me teach you how to really play." For the next 3 years, he became my mentor, my teacher, my surrogate father in the world of pharmaceutical investments. He taught me to read market trends, to identify undervalued opportunities, to build relationships with manufacturers and distributors, to move money across borders legally and strategically. He introduced me to investors, opened doors that would have remained locked for a young woman from Enugu, and most importantly, he taught me the power of silence. "Never let them see your full hand," he'd said. "Humility is the greatest weapon in business. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're lucky, not smart. And while they're dismissing you, buy their company out from under them." When Chief Okonkwo died suddenly from a heart attack at 73, his will shocked everyone. His distant relatives, who'd been circling like vultures waiting for their inheritance, discovered he'd left them nothing. His houses, his cars, his furniture, all sold, with proceeds donated to charity. His business? Dissolved, with assets distributed to his employees according to their years of service. But his investment portfolio, the real source of his wealth, the offshore accounts and international holdings worth hundreds of millions, all of it went to me, a 24-year-old pharmacy student who wasn't even related to him by blood. The relatives tried to contest it, screaming about manipulation and undue influence, but Chief's lawyers had built an unbreakable case. Video testimonials explaining his decision, documentation showing he was of sound mind, even letters he'd written explaining that I was the daughter he'd never had, the legacy he'd chosen. The courts ruled in my favor. And overnight, I went from having millions to having hundreds of millions. From being wealthy to being rich. From being comfortable to being powerful. But here's what separated me from people like Ngozi Okafor, from people like the woman Chinedu had betrayed me for. I didn't need anyone to see my wealth. I didn't need the validation, the recognition, the Instagram posts showing off private jets and designer bags. Chief Okonkwo's final lesson had been the most important. True power doesn't announce itself. So I kept working at the pharmacy, kept driving my Toyota, kept living in Surulere, kept being humble Adaeze from Enugu. Meanwhile, my investment managers, a team of professionals in London, New York, and Singapore, grew my portfolio exponentially. We invested in pharmaceutical manufacturing plants in Kenya, biotech startups in South Africa, medical supply chains across West Africa, generic drug production facilities in India. Every investment was strategic, carefully researched, positioned for maximum long-term returns. By the time I was 26, Adaeze Holdings was valued at $300 million. By 27, $400 million. And by the time I walked down the aisle to marry Chinedu, by the time I said, I do, to a man I genuinely loved, my net worth had crossed $500 million. I'd hidden it all from him deliberately, carefully, completely. When we met 2 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, I'd been instantly attracted to his ambition, his intelligence, his charm. He talked about building something meaningful with his tech company, about wanting to solve real problems for small businesses, about refusing to take the easy path of government contracts and corruption. He'd seemed different from other Lagos men, genuine, principled, actually interested in who I was as a person rather than what I could do for him. So I'd made a choice. I would date him as just Adaeze the pharmacist, not Adaeze the pharmaceutical investment mogul. I wanted to know if he would love me for me, if our relationship could be built on something real rather than the transactional exchanges that passed for romance in Lagos society. I'd watched too many of my wealthy friends trapped in marriages where they could never be sure if they were loved or just useful. I wanted something different, something pure, something true. God, I'd been so naive, so stupidly, heartbreakingly naive. The night before our wedding, when Chinedu asked me to sign that document giving him access to my pharmacy salary for his investments, I'd known exactly what I was signing. A test. A final, definitive test of his character. The account he'd be accessing held exactly 47,000 naira, about $60. Pocket change. Grocery money. Nothing that mattered. My real accounts, the ones holding hundreds of millions, were structured through offshore corporations and trusts with layers of legal protection that would take an army of lawyers years to penetrate. He could have that 47,000 and whatever else he found in the checking account I used for daily expenses. Meanwhile, my quarterly investment returns alone exceeded what he'd make in a lifetime. I'd signed that document with a smile, kissed his cheek, and gone to bed wondering if I was being paranoid. Wondering if maybe I was wrong about the signs I'd been seeing. The late nights, the expensive gifts he claimed came from clients, the way he'd started talking about Ngozi Okafor with a reverence that made my stomach turn. But gut instincts exist for a reason. And mine had been screaming. Now, standing in the aftermath of my wedding day, having watched my husband walk out of our reception to sleep with his mistress, I finally understood. I'd married a man who'd loved my perceived weakness more than my actual strength. A man who'd wanted a wife he could control, manipulate, mold into his vision of supportive femininity. If he'd known about my money, about my power, about who I really was, he never would have married me. Because men like Chinedu don't want equals. They want accessories. They want women who make them feel big, successful, important, not women who might outshine them. Ngozi Okafor, for all her wealth, understood this perfectly. She'd bought him precisely because he was someone she could control, someone whose ego she could feed, someone who would never threaten her position. But both of them had miscalculated catastrophically. Because the woman they dismissed, the humble pharmacist they'd betrayed and underestimated, was about to remind them of something fundamental. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply acts. And when it does, when that moment of reckoning arrives, there's nowhere to hide. No amount of Range Rovers or designer dresses or Instagram posts can protect you. The storm was coming. And I was done being patient. The signs had been there all along, written in a language I'd refused to translate because acknowledging the words meant accepting a truth that would shatter me. 3 months into our relationship, Chinedu's eyes had started doing this thing whenever money came up in conversation, a subtle brightening, like a switch flipping on behind his pupils. We'd be at dinner with friends, someone would mention a business deal or investment opportunity, and his entire body would lean forward, hungry and alert, like a dog catching the scent of meat. I'd noticed but explained it away as ambition, as drive, as the natural response of an entrepreneur trying to build something meaningful. Now, sitting in the wreckage of my wedding night, I could see those moments for what they really were, auditions. He'd been testing the room, measuring who had money and power, calculating who could be useful. And when Ngozi Okafor's name first entered our orbit at a tech conference in Lagos, mentioned casually by a mutual acquaintance as the real estate queen who's looking to diversify into tech investments, I'd watched my boyfriend's face transform into something I barely recognized. Interest, calculation, desire. Not for me. For opportunity. The business dinners started innocently enough, or so he'd claimed. Baby, Ngozi Okafor wants to meet about potentially investing in TechBridge, he'd announced one evening, his voice vibrating with an excitement I hadn't heard in months. His company was hemorrhaging money by then. The tech support platform wasn't gaining traction, clients were scarce, and the office he'd rented in Yaba was costing more than he was making. His pride was wounded, his confidence shattered, and then this wealthy, powerful woman expressed interest in his potential. How could he resist? It's just dinner, he'd said, kissing my forehead before leaving our apartment dressed in his best suit, smelling of cologne I didn't recognize. Business, baby. This could change everything for us. Us. That word became his favorite weapon, deployed strategically to disarm any concerns I raised. Every late night, every mysterious expense, every unexplained absence was justified with that same phrase. For us. As if betrayal became acceptable when wrapped in the language of shared dreams. The dinners became a ritual. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, always at upscale restaurants in Victoria Island or Ikoyi that I knew his failing business couldn't afford. He'd return home after midnight, reeking of expensive perfume that clung to his clothes like evidence. Ngozi knows everyone, he'd explain, eyes glassy with wine and ambition. Tonight we met with the MD of First Bank. Next week, she's introducing me to the CEO of MTN. Ada, do you understand what this means? These connections could turn TechBridge into something massive. I'd nod and smile, playing the supportive girlfriend, while my gut twisted with a knowing I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Because acknowledging it meant choosing between my love for him and my respect for myself. And I'd already invested 2 years into this relationship, already planned a future with him, already convinced myself that his flaws were manageable and his potential was worth the wait. Sunk cost fallacy, the economists call it. The inability to walk away from something you've poured yourself into, even when every rational indicator screams that you should run. The Range Rover appeared in our apartment parking lot on a Tuesday morning, gleaming black with temporary registration plates. I'd been leaving for my pharmacy shift when I saw Chinidu standing next to it, grinning like a child on Christmas morning. Surprise, he'd shouted, jangling keys that caught the sunlight. My stomach had dropped to my feet. Chinidu, whose car is this? He'd laughed, that charming laugh that had made me fall in love with him, and pulled me into his arms. It's mine, baby. Well, ours. A client gave it to me as a gift. Advance payment for a major contract TechBridge is about to secure. Can you believe it? No, I couldn't believe it. Because no client gives a Range Rover Sport, worth at least 30 million naira, as an advance payment for tech support services. But when I questioned him, his face had hardened into something defensive and unfamiliar. Why can't you just be happy for me? For once, something good is happening with my business, and you're acting like I've done something wrong. The accusation stung precisely because it was designed to. He'd learned to weaponize my love, turning my concerns into character flaws, making me feel guilty for trusting my instincts. His wardrobe transformed next, suddenly full of designers I'd only seen in magazines. Tom Ford suits, Gucci loafers, Versace shirts with price tags that would have fed a family for months. Ngozi took me shopping, he'd explained casually, as if accepting thousands of dollars worth of clothing from another woman was perfectly normal behavior for an engaged man. She says image matters in business. If I'm going to meet with CEOs and investors, I need to look the part. The logic was sound enough to create doubt, manipulative enough to make me question whether I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe this was how business worked in Lagos at higher levels. Maybe I was letting my insecurity cloud my judgment. He'd sensed my hesitation and pressed his advantage. Ada, you work in a pharmacy. You don't understand how corporate Nigeria operates. These relationships, these investments in appearance, it's all part of the game. Ngozi is mentoring me, teaching me how to move in circles where real money flows. She believes in me when everyone else has written me off. Even you seem to doubt me. That last sentence was a masterclass in manipulation, shifting the conversation from his inappropriate relationship with another woman to my alleged lack of faith in his abilities. The night before our wedding, after most guests had left the rehearsal dinner, Chinita had cornered me in the hotel lobby with a manila envelope and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Baby, I need you to sign something," he'd said, his voice casual but his eyes avoiding mine. Inside the envelope was a document granting him power of attorney over my bank accounts, specifically the checking account where my pharmacy salary was deposited. "It's just a formality," he'd explained quickly, too quickly.
"For my business accounts.
The bank requires spousal authorization for some of the investments I'm making. It's standard procedure." Nothing about it was standard. Nothing about it felt right. But I was 24 hours away from marrying this man, surrounded by 300 guests who'd traveled to Lagos for our wedding, standing in a hotel lobby where my parents and his parents were laughing together over drinks, and the thought of calling everything off because of a bad feeling seemed insane. So, I'd signed it, smiled,
Kissed him,
and felt a piece of my soul whisper a warning I chose to ignore. The account he'd gain access to held exactly 47,000 naira, roughly $60, and my monthly pharmacy salary of 350,000 naira, about $400.
Pocket change.
But he didn't know that. He thought he was getting access to everything I had, all my resources, my financial life. The real money. The $500 million in Adaeze holdings, the investment portfolios, the offshore accounts, the real estate holdings, the pharmaceutical company shares. All of it was structured through corporations and trusts he couldn't touch, couldn't access, couldn't even discover without an army of forensic accountants and international lawyers. I'd signed that document as a test, a final examination of his character. Would he respect my finances, handle the access responsibly, treat our money as shared resources in a partnership? Or would he see it as an opportunity, a vulnerability to exploit, a door he could walk through to take what he wanted? Now, 12 hours after our wedding, after watching him leave our reception to sleep with the woman who'd been grooming him for months, I had my answer. He'd failed. Catastrophically.
Completely.
And the woman he'd betrayed for a Range Rover and some designer clothes had more money in her investment portfolio than Ngozi Okafor would make in 3 lifetimes. The irony was so perfect it would have been funny if my heart wasn't still bleeding on the marble floor where it had shattered. He'd traded a gold mine for fool's gold. And he didn't even know it yet. Dawn broke over Lagos like a wound opening, orange and red bleeding across the Atlantic Ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our honeymoon suite at Eco Hotel. I'd been sitting in the same chair since 11 p.m., still wearing my reception dress. A champagne-colored silk number I'd changed into after the ceremony, watching the city lights blink out one by one as morning approached. My phone had died hours ago, overwhelmed by messages from concerned family members wondering where the bride and groom had disappeared to after the reception. The champagne bottle room service had delivered for the happy couple sat unopened on the table, condensation pooling beneath it like tears. My wedding bouquet, preserved in water, was already wilting, white roses turning brown at the edges like a metaphor I was too exhausted to unpack. The suite, 30,000 naira per night, with its king-size bed draped in white linens and rose petals, its jacuzzi tub, its balcony overlooking the ocean, was supposed to be where we started our marriage, where we made love as husband and wife for the first time, where we whispered promises and planned our future. Instead, it had become a crime scene. The scene of a murder. My naivete, my trust, my love, all of it dead. The door lock beeped at 6:07 a.m., the electronic click obscenely loud in the silence. I didn't turn around. Didn't move. Just watched the reflection in the window as Chinita stumbled inside, his tuxedo rumpled and stained, bow tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose. He'd removed his agbada somewhere, probably left it in her bed, tangled with her sheets, marked with her scent. His shoes were in his hand, like he'd been trying to sneak in quietly, like he thought I might be asleep and oblivious. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. Ada? His voice cracked when he saw me sitting there, still as a statue, backlit by the rising sun. Baby, I can explain. The word baby hit me like a slap. How dare he? How dare he use terms of endearment with the same mouth that had kissed another woman hours ago? How dare he walk in here expecting what? Forgiveness? Understanding? A wife too weak or stupid to connect the dots. I raised my hand. Not dramatically, not violently, just a simple gesture for silence, and watched him freeze mid-step. Don't, I said, my voice so cold it didn't sound like mine. It sounded like my mother's voice, the tone she used when she was beyond anger, past rage, in that frozen wasteland where disappointment lives. Don't say, baby. Don't say you can explain. Don't insult me with whatever lie you've been rehearsing for the past 7 hours. 7 hours. I'd counted every single minute, watching the clock on the nightstand tick away what should have been our wedding night. He'd spent our wedding night with her, with Ngozi Okafor, with his mistress, while I sat here in this expensive suite, in this expensive dress, becoming someone I barely recognized, someone capable of the kind of coldness that was currently flooding through my veins like ice water replacing blood. Chinita's face cycled through expressions too quickly, shock, fear, calculation, then landing on wounded innocence. He was going to try to gaslight me. I could see it forming in his eyes, the strategy taking shape. Ada, I don't know what you think happened, but you left our wedding reception at 9:47 p.m. I interrupted, my voice clinical, detached, like I was reading a police report. You followed Ngozi Okafor through the service exit into the private corridor. I saw you kiss her outside the presidential suite. I watched you. I stood there in my wedding gown, in the hallway of the hotel where 300 people were celebrating our marriage, and I watched my husband of 3 hours put his hands on another woman. Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of reality spreading across his face. The wounded innocence dissolved. Now, there was just panic. It wasn't. Ada, she trapped me, he stammered, moving toward me with his hands outstretched like he was approaching a wild animal. Ngozi she's obsessed with me, baby. I've been trying to handle it quietly, didn't want to worry you, but she cornered me last night, threatened to pull all her investments from TechBridge if I didn't. The lie was so clumsy, so transparently desperate, that something inside me snapped. Not into rage, into clarity. Crystal clear, diamond-hard clarity that cut through every excuse I'd ever made for him, every red flag I'd ignored, every gut instinct I'd dismissed. This man, my husband, the person I'd chosen to build a life with, was not who I thought he was. Maybe he never had been. Maybe I'd been in love with a performance, a carefully curated version of himself designed to appeal to what he thought I wanted. The real Chinidu, the one standing before me now reeking of expensive perfume and lies, was a stranger. Stop, I said softly, and something in my tone made him freeze. Just stop, Chinidu. I saw you. I saw how you touched her. That wasn't a woman forcing herself on you. That was you, choosing her, on our wedding day. My voice cracked on the last 3 words, the only display of emotion I'd allowed myself since sitting down in this chair 8 hours ago. His face crumpled, real tears forming now, and he dropped to his knees on the hotel carpet. Please, Ada. Please. I made a mistake. I'm weak. I'm stupid. God, I'm so sorry. It meant nothing. She means nothing. It's you I love. It's you I married. Please don't throw away everything we've built because I made one mistake. One mistake. As if betrayal could be quantified, as if there was an acceptable threshold for destroying someone's trust. As if I'm sorry could stitch back together the kind of damage he'd inflicted. Get up, I said, exhausted suddenly, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with a sleepless night. Get up, Chinidu. You don't get to kneel. You don't get to play the repentant husband. Not after what you did. He rose slowly, hope flickering in his eyes, misinterpreting my words as an opening for negotiation. But there was no negotiation coming. No discussion. No path forward. I'd spent the night in this chair making decisions, and every single one of them had led me to the same conclusion. This marriage was over before it began. I just needed to decide how it would end. Quietly, with a quick annulment that would spare both families the scandal and embarrassment, or loudly, with the full truth exposed, consequences delivered, lessons taught. The old Adaeze. The humble pharmacist, the supportive girlfriend, the woman who'd hidden her wealth to be loved for herself, would have chosen the quiet route, would have signed whatever papers made this go away quickly, would have moved on with her dignity intact, would have let him escape with his reputation relatively unscathed. But the new Adaeze, the one born in that hallway watching her husband betray her, was realizing something fundamental. Sometimes love requires you to be cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the full weight of their consequences. Not as punishment, as education, as the kind of lesson that actually changes a person. Chinito had spent our entire relationship believing he could manipulate me, control me, use my love as a shield against accountability. It was time he learned differently. It was time he understood exactly who he'd married, and exactly what he'd lost. Ngozi Okafor's Instagram post appeared 48 hours after my wedding, while I was still processing the implosion of my marriage from the isolate ion of a hotel room I'd moved to, not the honeymoon suite, but a standard room 3 floors down where I could breathe without drowning in the scent of dead roses and shattered dreams. My cousin Adaeze had brought my phone charger, some clothes for my apartment, and a bottle of wine we didn't drink because alcohol felt like cheating. I wanted to feel every single ounce of this pain, wanted to remember it with perfect clarity, so I'd never be this naive again. The notification lit up my screen while Adaeze was mid-rant about hiring someone to handle Chinito, by which she meant anything from slashing his tires to something far more permanent that I had to talk her down from. Then we both saw it. The post. Her and Chinito, sprawled across a white leather couch in what was unmistakably her Banana Island penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows behind them showing the Lagos skyline at night, champagne glasses in hand, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking directly at the camera with expressions that could only be described as victorious. The caption made my blood boil. Real queens don't compete. We replace. The comment section was a digital massacre of my reputation. Friends, acquaintances, even people I'd never met, all chiming in with their hot takes on my humiliation. That's so disrespectful, Skull. Wait, is that Adaeze's husband? Girl, this is messy even for Lagos. The audacity to post this 2 days after his wedding. Some men don't deserve good women. Money always wins. The last comment stung precisely because it reflected what everyone was thinking. Ngozi had money, power, sophistication. Everything I supposedly lacked. In their narrative, I was the small-town pharmacy girl who'd gotten lucky enough to marry above her station, and Chinito had finally woken up and chosen the woman he should have been with all along. The woman who could actually do something for him. The woman who mattered. I'd stared at that screen until the words blurred, until rage and grief fought for dominance in my chest, until Adaeze grabbed the phone from my hands and threw it across the room. Ada, you need to stop looking at this. She's a terrible person. He's a terrible person. They deserve each other. She was right. They did deserve each other. But deserving each other didn't mean they'd won. I'd picked up my phone, screen cracked but functional, fitting metaphor, and zoomed in on Ngozi's post, specifically the location tag she'd been arrogant enough to include. Okafor Luxury Real Estate, Victoria Island Office. My mind, razor sharp despite the emotional chaos, caught on something. Victoria Island. That office. I knew that building. I'd been there once for pharmaceutical industry conference, remembered the sleek lobby, the expensive art installation in the atrium, the way the entire structure screamed serious money. But why did I know it? Why was something clicking in my memory? I opened my investment portfolio app, password protected, encrypted, the one Chinito didn't even know existed, and navigated to my real estate holdings. Adaeze Properties Limited. My shell company. The one that owned commercial real estate across Lagos, Abuja, and Accra. I scrolled through the properties list, and there it was. Victoria Island Commercial Complex, 142 Amadabella Way. Purchased 3 years ago for 250 million naira. Current value, 800 million naira. Current major tenant, Okafor Luxury Real Estate, occupying floors 12 to 15. Monthly rent, 12 million naira. Landlord, Adaeze Properties Limited owner, me. The laughter that erupted from my chest was unhinged, slightly hysterical, the kind of laughter that made Adaeze look at me with genuine concern. Ada, are you okay? She asked, reaching for me like I might be having a breakdown. But I wasn't breaking down. I was breaking through the fog of betrayal and grief into something clearer, sharper, more purposeful. Obi, I said, my voice steady now, powered by a revelation so perfect it felt like divine comedy. I own her building. My cousin's face went blank with confusion. What? Ngozi Okafor. The woman Chinedu left me for. The woman currently celebrating her victory on Instagram. She rents her office space from me. I own the building. She's been paying me, Ada, 12 million naira every month to run her real estate business for my property. And she has no idea. The irony was so exquisite, so poetically perfect, that for a moment I just savored it. This woman who'd looked at me and seen nothing, who dismissed me as insignificant, who was currently gloating about replacing me, was literally paying me rent to exist in her professional life. Adaeze's expression transformed from confusion to understanding to pure, unadulterated joy. Ada, are you saying what I think you're saying? She was thinking revenge. Eviction. Destroying Ngozi's business in one strategic move. And yes, I could do that. I had the power. One phone call to my property managers, one lease violation notice, and Okafor Luxury Real Estate would be scrambling to relocate their entire operation. It would cost them millions, destroy their Q4 earnings, damage their reputation with clients who expected stability. I could ruin her with less effort than it took to make breakfast. But that felt too obvious. Too crude. Too small. Because here's what Ngozi Okafor still didn't understand. I wasn't competing with her. You can't compete with someone you've already surpassed. She thought we were in a game for Chinedu's affection, for his commitment, for the privilege of being with him. She thought she'd won that game. What she didn't realize was that I was playing an entirely different game. One where Chinedu was irrelevant. One where her victory was actually her greatest vulnerability. Call Tun for me, I told Adaeze, referencing my property manager, a sharp, efficient man who'd been handling my real estate portfolio for 2 years and understood the value of discretion. Tell him I need a full audit of Ngozi Okafor's lease agreement. Every clause, every provision, every fine print detail. And I want a complete financial profile on Okafor Luxury Real Estate, their revenue streams, their client list, their debts, everything he can legally access. Adaeze's grin was feral. You're going to destroy her. No, I corrected, feeling something settle in my chest, something cold and focused and absolutely certain. I'm going to educate her. There's a difference. Revenge is about inflicting pain. Education is about teaching someone the true nature of reality, showing them what they couldn't see before, forcing them to confront the consequences of their arrogance. Ngozi had looked at me and seen a victim, someone to be stepped over, someone whose pain didn't matter because I didn't matter. I was going to show her exactly how wrong she was, not with anger, not with vengeance, with the simple, devastating truth about who she'd been dealing with all along. The audit came back within 6 hours. Tund worked fast when properly motivated. Ngozi's lease was ironclad, professionally drafted, no easy violations to exploit. But the financial profile was interesting. Very interesting. Okafor Luxury Real Estate, for all its Instagram-worthy glamour, was over-leveraged. They'd expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt, invested in properties that hadn't appreciated as projected. Their cash flow was tight. Very tight. Tight enough that losing major clients would create serious problems. Tight enough that unexpected expenses could trigger a cascade of financial issues. Tight enough that someone with the right connections and resources could make their business very, very uncomfortable. Tund, I'd said on our follow-up call, my voice calm and businesslike. I need you to conduct a building inspection. Full compliance check, fire safety, structural integrity, elevator maintenance, everything. And I need it done in the next 2 weeks. There was a pause on the other end. Tund was smart enough to read between the lines. A full compliance check will require Okafor Luxury Real Estate to shut down operations for at least 3 days while we conduct inspections on their floors, he said carefully. It will also likely reveal code violations that will need to be addressed immediately, at their expense. I know, I replied. Do it anyway. And Tund? I want everything documented. Every conversation, every notification, every violation. Legal, professional, unassailable. Because when you're going to dismantle someone's world, you do it with perfect precision. You don't give them anything to fight back with. You don't make it personal. You just apply pressure to existing weaknesses and watch the structure collapse under its own weight. Ngozi thought she'd won. She'd posted her victory photo. She'd claimed her prize. She'd celebrated her replacement of the weak, insignificant pharmacist who couldn't compete. But she'd made one critical error. She'd underestimated me. And in Lagos, in business, in life, in war, underestimating your opponent is the first step toward your own destruction. I was packing clothes from the apartment I'd shared with Chinedu, or rather, throwing them into garbage bags with a kind of aggressive efficiency that comes from channeling heartbreak into physical action, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. International code. London. My stomach dropped. Only a handful of people had my private number, and international calls usually meant one of 3 things: investment opportunities, financial emergencies, or legal problems. Hello. I answered, wedging the phone between my shoulder and ear while folding a dress I'd never wear again. Couldn't bear to look at because I'd worn it on our second date, back when I'd still believed in fairy tales. Mrs. Adaeze Okonkwo? The voice was male, professional, with a clipped British accent that marked expensive education and even more expensive services. This is Colonel Adeyemi from Standard Chartered Private Banking, London office. I apologize for calling on a Saturday, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. My hands stilled on the dress. Standard Chartered managed my primary investment portfolio. $200 million in diversified assets, real estate holdings, and pharmaceutical company shares. They didn't call unless something was seriously wrong. What kind of situation? I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline suddenly flooding my system. There was a pause, the kind that precedes delivering bad news. Mrs. Okonkwo, approximately 45 minutes ago, someone attempted to access your investment accounts. A Mr. Chinedu Okonkwo presented himself at our Lagos branch with legal documentation claiming power of attorney over your financial assets. The world tilted sideways. The dress fell from my hands. What? He provided a document bearing your signature, dated 3 days ago, allegedly granting him full access to your accounts. Our Lagos team, following protocol, began processing his request. However, our fraud detection systems flagged the attempt because Colonel paused, choosing his words carefully. Well, Mrs. Okonkwo, we've managed your wealth for 4 years.
We know you.
We know how you operate. And this request didn't match your profile or behavior patterns. So we halted the process and called you directly for verification before proceeding. My legs gave out. I sank onto the bed, our bed, the one where I'd slept beside him for 2 years, trusting him, loving him, never suspecting, and felt reality reorganize itself into something monstrous. Chinedu had tried to steal my money. Not his mistress's money. Not some mysterious investor's money.
Mine.
The $500 million he didn't even know existed. Somehow, he'd discovered my accounts. Somehow, he'd connected the dots between humble pharmacist data and Adaeze Holdings CEO. And his first instinct, his immediate response to that knowledge, wasn't shame or apology or reconsidering the destruction of our marriage. It was theft. He'd tried to rob me. Mrs. Okonkwo, are you still there? Colonel's voice pulled me back from the edge of whatever psychological cliff I'd been standing on. Yes, I whispered, then stronger. Yes, I'm here. I need verbal confirmation. Did you authorize Mr. Chinedu Okonkwo to access your investment portfolio? Absolutely not. The words came out flat, emotionless, but underneath was a rage, so pure it felt like swallowing fire. The document he provided was for a personal checking account only. He has no authorization, none, to access any accounts associated with Adaeze Holdings or my investment portfolio. Understood. We'll deny his request immediately and flag his identity in our fraud prevention system. Would you like us to involve law enforcement? This constitutes attempted financial fraud. Law enforcement.
Police.
A criminal investigation into my husband of 72 hours. The scandal would be nuclear. Both families destroyed by the fallout. His parents, who'd been nothing but kind to me, humiliated. My parents, traditional Igbo people who'd raised me to believe in forgiveness and family loyalty, devastated. Everyone we knew forced to choose sides, their judgments and opinions becoming public spectacle. Not yet, I said, mind racing through options, calculating moves 3 steps ahead like Chief Okonkwo had taught me. I need to handle this personally first. But, Colonel, I want everything documented. Every attempt he made, every document he presented, every word he said to your Lagos team. I want a paper trail that could stand up in court if needed. Already done. I'll have a complete report sent to your secure email within the hour. And Mrs. Okonkwo? I'm very sorry you're dealing with this. If there's anything else we can do, actually there is. I need you to pull up my full portfolio overview. I want to know exactly what he tried to access, what he would have seen if you'd approved his request. The keyboard clicks on Colonel's and sounded like a countdown. He attempted to access all accounts under Adaeze Holdings. Total value, $497,600,000 as of market close yesterday. That includes your pharmaceutical investments in Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, your biotech startup shares, your medical supply chain holdings, your real estate portfolio, and your offshore accounts in Singapore and Dubai. Nearly $500 million. That's what Chinedu had tried to steal. That's what he thought he deserved, what he believed he was entitled to, simply because he'd married me. The audacity was almost incomprehensible. There's one more thing, Colonel continued, his tone shifting to something almost apologetic. Our Lagos team noted that Mr. Okonkwo seemed unprepared for the amounts involved. When they informed him of the portfolio value, he apparently became aggressive, insisting there must be a mistake, that his wife was just a pharmacist who couldn't possibly have access to that kind of wealth. He accused our staff of trying to scam him. A laugh escaped my throat, sharp, bitter, nothing like humor. Chinedu had discovered my secret and still couldn't believe it. Even confronted with evidence, even sitting in a private banking office being told about my investments, he'd rejected reality because it didn't match his narrative of who I was supposed to be. Small. Manageable. He kept saying, my wife doesn't have this kind of money. I know her. She's just a pharmacist, Colonel added, and something in his tone suggested he found the whole situation grimly amusing. Our team tried to explain that Mrs. Adaeze Nwachukwu Okonkwo and Adaeze Holdings CEO Adaeze Nwachukwu are the same person, but he refused to accept it until they showed him your identification documentation and corporate registration papers. Then, according to our security footage, he sat in complete silence for approximately 4 minutes before demanding access to the accounts. 4 minutes. That's how long it took for Chinedu's reality to shatter and rebuild itself around his greed. 4 minutes to process that the woman he'd betrayed, the wife he'd cheated on during their wedding reception, the humble pharmacist he'd thought he could manipulate and control, that woman was actually wealthier than his mistress, wealthier than anyone in his family, wealthier than he'd probably be in 10 lifetimes. And his response? Not remorse. Not horror at what he'd done. Theft. The immediate, instinctive move to take what he now believed he'd earned through marriage. Thank you, Colonel, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through my chest. Send that report to my email. And please alert all institutions where I have financial interests. I want security protocols upgraded immediately. Full biometric verification required for any access attempts, no exceptions. Consider it done. And Mrs. Okonkwo? For what it's worth, you handled this situation with remarkable composure. Many people in your position would have reacted very differently. Composure. He thought this was composure. He couldn't see that I was vibrating with a rage so intense it had transcended emotion and become something colder, more focused, infinitely more dangerous. Because that's the thing about profound betrayal. It doesn't always look like screaming and tears and dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like resolve. Like a woman making phone calls and taking notes and planning her next moves with the precision of a surgeon preparing to operate. Chinita had tried to rob me, had discovered my secret and immediately weaponized that knowledge, had proven, definitively and unambiguously, that there was no depth he wouldn't sink to, no line he wouldn't cross, no betrayal too great if it served his interests. And in doing so, he'd made a critical mistake. He'd shown me exactly who he was. Not the charming entrepreneur I'd fallen in love with. Not the struggling businessman who needed support. But a common thief. A user. A man whose love had always been transactional, always been conditional, always been about what he could extract rather than what he could give. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. This wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness or finding a path forward. This was war. And he'd just declared it on the worst possible opponent. A woman with unlimited resources, professional connections across 3 continents, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The old Adaeze would have been devastated, would have cried, would have wondered what she'd done wrong, how she could have prevented this, whether there was still hope for redemption. But the old Adaeze died in that hotel hallway when she watched her husband betray her. The woman sitting on this bed, phone in hand, was someone new, someone harder. Someone who understood that mercy without accountability is just enabling. And Chinita was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. You don't steal from queens. You bow. Or you burn.